You're listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast.
Welcome to a record-breaking episode of The Whole Truth podcast. I'm Paul Armstrong. I say it's a record-breaking episode with very good reason. We've got Andrew Munckton back on the show. He's the Managing Director of Talisman Mining. Talisman has just put out some results which, at the risk of using a very common word these days in the drilling game, they are nothing short of spectacular. The results come from the company's Durnings project in New South Wales. Andrew was on the show just a few weeks ago talking about the first assays that he has from Durnings and saying that the results were very positive, and in fact they were so encouraging he had just committed to a 13-hole follow-up program. Since we left Andrew, he's drilled those holes and he's just received the assays from the first one. And as I say, they're absolutely sensational. There's assays from the remaining 12 holes pending. Andrew gives us a rundown on what they mean and what we can expect over the next few weeks, which is a pivotal time for the company, which does look to be on the cusp of what could well be a world-scale discovery in New South Wales. Andrew, when we last spoke in early March, you had just released your first assays from the Durnings prospect in New South Wales. You clearly thought these were very positive, some great potential, but you made the point they were early days. The assays came from one hole in that program that had just been completed. Here's what you had to say at the time.
We drilled some holes at Durnings pre-Christmas time, drilled 6 holes, got 6 intersections, the best of which is 40 metres at about, and I'm talking gold equivalent terms now, it's at about 2.2 grams per tonne gold with a high-grade intersection over 6
But it's another
metres.
lead, zinc, silver, like rip and tear?
No, it's slightly different, more in keeping with the style that you get in this Cobar Basin. So it's lead, zinc, silver, gold, copper in about equal parts, equal value parts. So multi-element, multi-phase kind of mineralisation. As I said, we drilled 6 holes pre-Christmas time. All the assays are back there, and the drill rig will finish at rip and tear. The diamond rig will finish at rip and tear over this weekend and be there at Durnings early next week. The RC rig turns up on the 5th of March. So we're following up those high-grade intersections at Durnings in the March and April period. So the message really, I think, is watch this space during March and April for what those results look like.
Andrew, since we recorded that podcast in early March, you've been away drilling. You liked what you saw in that hole and those assays, and you committed to a 13-hole follow-up program, and you just announced the first assays from that program. What have you got on your hands?
Well, Paul, we think we've got a copper-gold high-grade zone in addition to the base metal zone that we intersected in the very first round of drilling that we reported back in March.
Now, these results that you've just put out this week from the first hole of that follow-up program, it's fair to say, Andrew, they're absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, they're some of the best results that I have seen in the last 30-odd years that I've been working in this kind of industry. So they're absolutely spectacular as far as I'm concerned.
You say that like you're trying to keep your hat on. It's obviously, most people would be jumping for joy. You're sitting here relatively restrained. I suppose after a long time in this industry, you've learnt that, one hole doesn't a discovery make, as they say. But nonetheless, these intersections, particularly the gold, 4 metres at nearly 19 grams a tonne, 24 at 4.6 metres along with 1% copper. Gold and copper, these are absolutely things that geologists can work all their lives for and not ever return.
They're certainly standout intersections both in this sort of New South Wales Lachlan Fold Belt, but also the kind of things that we have seen and all our geos have seen over this preceding 2 or 3 decades. So they really do stand alone. I'm trying to keep a lid on things a little bit because, as you say, we've got a long journey ahead of us, but we think we're off to a really good start here.
So let's look at what you've announced in this assay. As we said at the outset, Andrew, this is the first hole of the 13-hole follow-up program. There are assays presumably pending for another 12 holes.
Yeah, that's correct, Paul. So just to sort of wind back a little bit, the original program that we did in February and announced in March was 7 holes. One of those holes came in with 42 metres at 2.3% lead and 1.3% zinc and some supporting copper and gold. But importantly in that right at the bottom of the hole, there was 6 metres at 10% lead, 3.5% zinc, 126 silver, 1.93 gold and 0.4 copper. And that really spiked our attention as to this is a potential very high-grade zone. So we followed that up with this 13-hole program. The first results that we've put out are associated with the hole number 19, but it's the very first example, we think, of this sort of 2 zones of high-grade mineralisation. The first zone that we intersected, which is what we intersected in the original program, came in with 5.5 metres at 2.6% zinc, 1.8% lead, some supporting silver, copper and gold. But then deeper in that hole, another 7.4 metres at 6.7% lead, 2.9% zinc, 137 silver, 0.2 copper and 0.24 gold, including a 1.7 metre wide massive sulphide zone. And the massive sulphides run 26.5% zinc, 558 grams per tonne silver, 7.8% lead, 0.7 copper and 0.81. So it's a spectacular base metals intersection. But subsequent to that, deeper in the hole, we hit a second zone, which is a copper-gold rich zone. It still has some base metals, but the copper and gold exceed the value of the base metals significantly. It was a 24.8 metre wide lower zone, averaging 4.5 grams per tonne gold, 1% copper, 4.3 lead, 0.8 zinc, 30 grams per tonne silver, of which there are some higher grade zones within that. The standout one you mentioned, 4 metres at 18.9 grams gold, 1.7 copper, 10.5 lead, 2.2 zinc, 77 grams silver. So there's lots and lots of numbers in here, but this is absolutely spectacular grade material.
So there is no doubt about the grade, as you say, spectacular, almost mind-blowing sort of results there. They are beyond question. The issue in the market now will become, is this just a lucky one-off hit you've got here, or is there genuine scale to this? Now, the first question you'd have to ask in assessing that is, how far away is this hole that you've just been discussing from the one you spoke about on the Whole Truth podcast in March? What's the distance as the crow flies?
So the March hole only intersected the base metal zone, and the base metal zone in hole 19, which is what we released Monday, is only about between 10 and 20 metres away from the base metal zone that we hit in hole number 6. But hole number 6 finished at 280 metres, and the high-grade copper-gold in this zone wasn't even discovered at that stage. So we don't really know yet how extensive this high-grade copper-gold zone is going to be, but we're there with the downhole EM tool now, assessing whether we've got off-hole conductors to follow up with that copper-gold intersection.
It begs the question, would you go back and drill hole 6, the hole we discussed in March, deeper?
We have drilled hole 6 deeper. We haven't released the results of those. They're behind hole 19 in the order in the assay lab, but they'll come to market in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
So going to what's in the lab, this result released this week is only on one hole. There's another dozen holes in the lab. Is that correct? That's
correct. So, it's a 13-hole program. We've released one hole, and the other 12 are imminent within the next 1 to 2 weeks.
And over what strike length are the other 12 holes? How far out do you go?
So they spread over about 2 kilometres of strike length. So it's quite a substantial zone that the original program of 7 holes assessed, but at a very early stage. And there was enough encouragement in that for us to go and drill additional holes associated with that 2 kilometres of strike length. The very first one that we've released, hole 19, has come in as a winner. We'll have to see what the other 12 holes look like over this next couple of weeks.
So obviously the next 2 weeks could be absolutely pivotal for Talisman.
And I think that not only the next 2 weeks in assays, but the next couple of weeks as the downhole EM comes back, our expectation is there'll definitely be good conductivity in the mineralisation that we've seen to date. So if there are other massive sulphide zones or extensions to the existing massive sulphide zone, or there are other copper, gold, base metal zones, then this downhole EM program should find them.
You could be on the cusp of a world-class discovery.
We're quietly confident that this looks like something that will be mined at some point in time. Early days yet, Paul. Long way to go, but we're quietly confident that we're onto something significant in this Lachlan Fold Belt area.
Now, it's important to put this in context, Andrew, because Durnings is just 35 kilometres down the road from the Rip and Tear discovery.
Yes, yep.
So it's not just a question of what Durnings is in isolation, is it? It's how it will fit in to the wider play here from an economic perspective with Rip and Tear.
Yes, not only with Rip and Tear, but we also had another project that we worked on 3 or 4 years ago called Blind Calf, which had some very strong copper intersections. No other base metals, but 10 metres at 2 and 3% copper were not unusual intersections for Blind Calf. And Blind Calf is only 10 kilometres from Durnings, between Rip and Tear and Durnings. So we have quite an extensive ground holding around this Durnings Rip and Tear area, and we think that there's going to be multiple deposits. Perhaps they'll be better grade than Durnings, perhaps they'll be less grade than Durnings from what we've seen so far. But we think that we're on a whole system here, and there are going to be multiple deposits within that system.
What have you got at Rip and Tear?
So Rip and Tear is a large, low-grade silver and lead deposit. Almost all the value is in the lead and the silver. There's a little bit of value in the zinc. But we think it's a very large, low-grade deposit. And for junior companies that are on the pathway that we're on, large, low-grade deposits are difficult to get up and producing, whereas relatively small or smaller, high-grade deposits like we think that we have at Durnings are much better for juniors to get up and running with. So, we see Durnings as the first step. Perhaps Rip and Tear is later in the horizon for us as a large low-grade thing, but Durnings with the high grade will certainly be the thing that takes priority for us in the immediate term.
But either way, you already have what would seem to be a substantial scale. It's a question of, the tonnage is there in some shape or form. It's a question of what the average grade will be. And obviously averages are boosted enormously by these sorts of figures at Durnings. Yeah,
there's been some discussion internally about, large, low grade with sweeteners from Rip and Tear with sweeteners from Durnings. Now, whether that turns out to be what we develop, I guess time will tell. And the results from Durnings that the market will see over this next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I think will tell us a pretty good story there.
Now, it's worth reminding our listeners, Andrew, that, of course, your biggest shareholder is none other than Kerry Hermanis, a man who has great experience in discoveries. He was behind the Jubilee nickel finds in WA many years ago. No doubt he's on the blower to you every 5 minutes.
Well, Kerry's got a very substantial history in high-grade discoveries of minerals, nickel in the case of Jubilee, perhaps copper, lead, zinc, gold, silver in the case of Talisman. So, we're really looking forward to continuing in this pathway. Kerry's one of the strongest and most influential supporters of the company, and so we're looking forward to his continued support.
And it has to be asked, since you put this result out, has anyone knocked on the door with some sort of corporate aspiration? There's a fair bit of M&A in the wind at the moment.
Yeah, lots of M&A in the wind at the moment across the whole sector. Paul, I don't think M&A is really what we're discussing at the moment. We're a couple of holes into what we think is a pretty substantial exploration program, and we're happy just continuing on with that exploration push for the time being. We'll see what happens over the next period of time, but M&A is not really on our agenda at this stage.
What about the first sign of a discovery, as they say, is analysts are ringing up wanting to come and see you and inevitably have a site visit? No doubt you'll be hosting some of those, I would have thought.
Well, there's a board visit in August to the project to get the board across it, and perhaps if there's enough interest from brokers and analysts, we'll be able to host one of those, post-August. But, let's see what the results look like for the next 3 or 4 weeks and take it from there.
Andrew, thanks very much for your time. This is obviously a moving feast. I think you've broken the record for the Whole Truth podcast. I don't think we've ever had anyone back on the show within 5 or 6 weeks of making their first appearance. That speaks volumes, if you like, about the extent of what you've got here at Durnings and the potential for it. I think it was well worth providing our listeners with an update here. This is more than an update. This is, as we keep saying, this is absolutely sensational numbers. What it translates to will become probably very clear over the next 2 or 3 weeks, I suspect. And who knows, we might have you back in the hot seat as early as another month away.
Well, I'd be more than pleased to come back, whether it's in a month or a few months, Paul.
Thanks very much.
Pleasure.
You've been listening to The Whole Truth, a Resources Rising Stars podcast, produced by Resource Media, hosted by Paul Armstrong for Reed Corporate. Please note that Reed Corporate does not provide investment advice, and investors should seek personalised advice before making any investment decisions.